The sun was setting over the bustling city skyline as a young man in a wheelchair rolled through the glass doors of a towering office building. His name wasn't important to most. They just knew him as the genius behind Globaltech Solutions, one of the world's leading technology companies. But 20 years ago, he was just a kid who loved computers, whose life changed forever after a car crash left him paralyzed from the waist down. Growing up wasn't easy. Kids can be cruel, and high school was a maze of stares and whispers. But he found comfort in coding, spending countless nights typing away at his computer while others slept. His mom would bring him hot chocolate, worried about his late nights, but somehow knowing this was his way of fighting back against a world that wasn't built for him. "You're going to do amazing things," she'd say, kissing his forehead. She was right, but even she couldn't have imagined just how far her son would go. College was different. People cared more about what was in his head than his wheelchair. He threw himself into his studies, focusing on creating technology that could help people like him. His first breakthrough came during his junior year. A voice-controlled system that made it easier for people with limited mobility to use computers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After graduation, he turned down lucrative job offers from big tech companies. He had bigger dreams. Working from his tiny apartment, living on instant noodles and determination, he started developing software that would change the game for people with disabilities. His first company started in that same apartment with just 2 old computers and an idea that wouldn't let him sleep. The early days were tough. Investors would look past him during presentations, directing their questions to his able-bodied business partner. Some straight up told him that a person in his condition couldn't handle the stress of running a company. He proved them wrong, one success at a time. His first major contract came from a school district looking to make their computer labs more accessible. The joy on a disabled student's face when they could finally use a computer independently, that made all the sleepless nights worth it. Word spread, and soon other schools came calling. But he didn't stop there. He pushed his team to think bigger, to dream up technology that could help people in ways no one had imagined before. They developed apps that could read emotions from facial expressions for people with autism, created virtual reality systems for physical therapy, and designed smart home systems that gave independence back to people with severe disabilities. As his company grew, so did his wealth. But the wheelchair-bound billionaire never forgot what it felt like to be the kid who couldn't reach the top shelf or play basketball with his friends. He made sure his office buildings were more than just accessible. They were designed to make everyone feel equal. The cafeteria had tables at different heights. Every door opened automatically, and there were charging stations for electric wheelchairs everywhere. He started a foundation that provided cutting-edge technology to people who couldn't afford it. During one of the foundation's events, a mother hugged him, crying because her nonverbal daughter could finally tell her "I love you" using one of his communication devices. That moment meant more to him than any money in his bank account. The media loved his story, the self-made billionaire who turned his own challenges into solutions for others. But he stayed away from the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes. His employees knew him as the boss who remembered everyone's names, who would roll into their offices unannounced to hear their ideas, and who never missed a chance to celebrate their successes. At 35, he had everything society said meant success, a fortune worth billions, a company that was changing lives, and respect from an industry that once doubted him. But sometimes, late at night in his penthouse apartment, he would look out at the city lights and feel a different kind of emptiness. He had built a world that could accommodate his wheelchair, but he hadn't found someone who could see past it to his heart. Little did he know, life was about to surprise him in the most unexpected way. But that's a story for another day, a story about how sometimes the biggest breakthroughs in life have nothing to do with technology and everything to do with the human heart. Spring had arrived at the Children's Rehabilitation Center, bringing with it the kind of morning that made everything feel possible. The young billionaire wasn't supposed to be there that day. His assistant had tried to convince him to send someone else to check on the new technology installation. But something told him he needed to go himself. Rolling through the center's brightly painted corridors, he smiled at the children's artwork decorating the walls. His company had donated a new virtual reality therapy system to the center, and he wanted to see it in action. The sound of laughter drew him toward one of the therapy rooms. That's when he saw her. A physical therapist was working with a young girl, helping her walk between parallel bars. What caught his attention wasn't just her gentle encouragement or professional demeanor. It was the way she had transformed what should have been a difficult therapy session into something that made the child giggle with joy. "Look at you go!" She cheered as the little girl took another wobbly step. "You're like a superhero in training." The child beamed, taking another determined step forward. He found himself pausing in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt the moment. But the therapist noticed him, and unlike most people who recognized him, she didn't immediately fuss or change her behavior. Instead, she warmly included him in the session. "Hey there, would you like to be our cheerleading squad?" she called out, her eyes twinkling. The little girl turned and waved enthusiastically, almost losing her balance but catching herself with determination. For the next few minutes, he joined in encouraging the young patient and watched as the therapist worked her magic. She had a way of making every small victory feel like winning an Olympic medal. After the session, while the child was getting ready to leave with her parents, the therapist approached him. Their conversation flowed naturally, no awkward pauses or the usual careful dancing around his disability that he'd grown used to. She spoke passionately about her work, her eyes lighting up as she described new therapy techniques she was developing. "The real challenge," she explained, gesturing to the therapy equipment, "isn't just helping them move, it's helping them believe they can." She shared stories about her patients' achievements, speaking about them with such pride you'd think they were her own children. He found himself opening up too, sharing his own experiences with physical therapy after his accident. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. When he mentioned some of the accessibility issues he'd faced, she pulled out a notebook and started jotting down ideas. "Have you ever thought about combining VR with adaptive equipment?" she asked, sketching a rough diagram. "Something that could make therapy feel more like an adventure." Her creativity and practical understanding of patients' needs impressed him. Their discussion was interrupted by his phone buzzing with reminders of upcoming meetings. For the first time in years, he felt annoyed by his busy schedule. As he prepared to leave, she handed him a simple business card, no fancy titles or graphics, just her name and contact information. "The kids would love to have you visit again," she said with a genuine smile. "They could use a success story like yours for inspiration." There was no hint of flattery in her voice, just honest appreciation for what his presence could mean to her patients. Over the next few days, he found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to that morning. It wasn't just her professional dedication that stuck with him, it was how she created an atmosphere where limitations felt temporary and possibilities endless. During boring board meetings, he caught himself thinking about her innovative therapy ideas. A week later, he found himself making an excuse to return to the center, supposedly to check on the VR system's performance. His heart did a little jump when he saw her working with another patient, this time teaching a teenage boy how to navigate using crutches. She spotted him and waved him over to join the session. Before he knew it, he was sharing his own experiences using mobility aids with the teenager, who hung on every word. The hour flew by, filled with practical tips, shared laughs, and the kind of genuine connection that couldn't be forced. As days turned into weeks, his visits to the center became more frequent. Each time, he discovered something new about her: her dedication to researching new therapy methods, her habit of bringing homemade cookies for her patients on their birthdays, the way she stayed late to help parents understand their children's therapy routines. But what struck him most was how she treated everyone the same, whether they were a billionaire in a wheelchair or a child taking their first steps after an accident. In her presence, titles and bank accounts didn't matter, only the human spirit and its capacity to overcome challenges. Little did he know that behind her warm smile and innovative therapy techniques, she carried a secret that would eventually change both their lives forever. But for now, he was content just to be in the presence of someone who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, someone who, for the first time in his life, made him forget about both his wheelchair and his wealth. Summer faded into autumn, and something beautiful was growing between the billionaire tech founder and the dedicated physical therapist. Their friendship blossomed through simple moments: shared lunches in the hospital cafeteria, long conversations about making the world more accessible, and countless cups of mediocre vending machine coffee. She started joining him for weekly visits to the tech company's accessibility lab, where her practical experience with patients brought invaluable insights. The development team loved her down-to-earth approach and the way she could explain complex therapy needs in simple terms. It's not about the fanciest technology, she'd say, adjusting a prototype. It's about making something that really works for people's everyday lives. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface of their growing connection. Late at night, after her regular therapy sessions ended, she would disappear into a small research lab in the hospital basement. Few knew about her secret project, a groundbreaking combination of neural interface technology and physical therapy techniques that showed promise for treating spinal cord injuries. The work consumed her free time and most of her savings. Her tiny apartment was filled with medical journals and research papers, her laptop crowded with data from preliminary trials. She'd been working on this project for years, long before meeting him, driven by the countless patients she'd seen struggle with paralysis. Their relationship deepened through honest conversations about life's challenges. One rainy evening, while sharing takeout in his office overlooking the city, he opened up about the loneliness of his position. "People either see the wheelchair or the bank account," he confessed, pushing away his half-eaten noodles. "They never just see me." She understood isolation in her own way. The weight of her secret research pressed heavily on her heart, especially now. Every time he talked about his disability, about learning to live with paralysis, she wanted to tell him about her work. But fear held her back, fear that he'd think she'd gotten close to him because of his wealth and influence in the medical technology field. Their connection grew stronger through small, genuine moments. He noticed how she always carried extra snacks for her young patients, how she celebrated every tiny improvement in their mobility as if it were a marathon victory. She appreciated how he remembered every detail about her patient's progress, how his eyes lit up when talking about making technology more accessible for everyone. During a charity gala his foundation hosted, she saw firsthand how he used his influence to champion disability rights. While other wealthy donors talked about tax benefits, he spoke passionately about creating real change in people's lives. That night, watching him navigate the crowd with grace and purpose, she realized she was falling in love not with his wealth or status, but with his heart. Meanwhile, her research was showing promising results. The preliminary data suggested her approach could help restore some mobility in cases of spinal cord injury. But bringing such technology to market would require millions in funding and years of clinical trials. Every time she thought about telling him, the moment never seemed right. Their worlds began to merge in unexpected ways. He started attending her patients' therapy milestone celebrations, bringing custom-made technological aids for each child. She began contributing ideas to his company's accessibility projects, her practical experience helping bridge the gap between innovation and usability. One evening, while they watched the sunset from his office balcony, a young patient's parent spotted them and waved from the street below. "You two are amazing together," the parent called out. "You both see possibilities where others see limitations." They shared a laugh, but the words struck deep. As autumn leaves fell around the rehabilitation center, their bond continued to strengthen. He found himself sharing dreams he never told anyone, not just about business success, but about making a real difference in the world. She listened with understanding, all while carrying her own dreams of revolutionary medical breakthroughs. The staff at the rehabilitation center watched their relationship blossom with knowing smiles. They saw how he would arrive early for their lunch dates, how she would light up when he rolled through the door. Even the youngest patients noticed, giggling about their special friendship. But beneath the surface of their deepening connection, her secret became increasingly difficult to keep. Every breakthrough in her research felt like another wall between them. The closer they grew, the more she struggled with the weight of her silence. What neither of them realized was that their greatest challenge and their greatest opportunity was just around the corner. As winter approached and holiday decorations began appearing in the hospital corridors, fate was preparing to test their connection in ways they never could have imagined. Winter brought with it a magical transformation, not just to the city covered in snow, but to two hearts growing closer each day. The billionaire and the physical therapist found themselves sharing more and more of their lives, their connection deepening in ways neither had expected. He noticed how she lived in a modest apartment building with no elevator, carrying her research materials up 4 flights of stairs every day. Despite his offers to help her find a more accessible place where they could spend more time together, she always declined with a gentle smile. "I'm saving for something important," she'd say, quickly changing the subject. Their evening conversations grew longer, often lasting until the hospital security guard would kindly remind them it was time to leave. They talked about everything: their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. He shared stories about building his company from scratch, about the days when investors wouldn't even look him in the eye. She told him about her first patient, a little boy who taught her that determination could overcome any obstacle. One snowy evening, while sharing hot chocolate in her tiny apartment kitchen, he noticed a stack of research papers poorly hidden behind her cookbooks. When he asked about them, she quickly explained they were just some medical journals she was reading to stay updated. But he caught a glimpse of complex neural diagrams before she could put them away, and something about her nervous smile stayed with him. Despite her secret weighing heavily on her mind, their relationship blossomed. He found himself making excuses to visit the rehabilitation center almost daily now. The children would cheer when they saw his wheelchair rolling down the hallway, knowing he often brought new gadgets for them to try. But everyone knew he was really there to see her. She started leaving little notes in his office when she visited, simple things like "Remember to eat lunch" or "You're changing lives today." He kept every single one tucked away in his desk drawer. The cleaning staff would smile knowingly when they saw him reading them late at night, a soft expression on his face. During a particularly challenging therapy session with a teenage patient who was struggling to stay motivated, they worked together seamlessly. He shared his experiences of adapting to life in a wheelchair while she demonstrated new exercises. The teenager's parents watched with tears in their eyes as their child finally smiled again, inspired by their combined encouragement. "You two should get married," the teenager blurted out, causing both of them to blush. But the words lingered in the air, giving voice to what everyone around them had been thinking. As winter deepened, he found himself thinking more and more about their future together. He noticed how she would absent-mindedly scroll through research-funding websites during their lunch breaks, or how she would get lost in thought while watching patients struggling with mobility issues. There was something she wasn't telling him, but his heart told him to be patient. The proposal wasn't a grand spectacle like everyone expected from a billionaire. Instead, it happened one evening in the hospital's rooftop garden, where they often escaped for quiet moments together. She had just finished telling him about a breakthrough one of her young patients had made that day, her face glowing with pride and passion. "I want to spend my life watching you change the world," he said simply, pulling out a small ring box. The ring wasn't flashy. He had noticed how she preferred simple, practical things. It was elegant but understated, just like her. Tears filled her eyes as she said yes, but he noticed they weren't just tears of joy. There was something else there, a shadow of worry that crossed her face even as she smiled. When he asked if everything was okay, she hugged him tightly and whispered, "Everything's perfect. You're perfect." News of their engagement spread quickly through both the hospital and his company. The media caught wind of it too: the billionaire tech mogul and the dedicated physical therapist, a modern-day fairy tale. But they both knew their story was far more complex than any fairy tale. Her research team noticed she was spending even more late nights in the lab now, driven by an urgency they didn't understand. The preliminary results were becoming more promising each day, but the weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. Every time she looked at her engagement ring, she was reminded of the truth she needed to share. He noticed these little things: her distracted moments, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she would sometimes stare at him with a mix of love and worry. But he attributed it to wedding stress and her dedication to her patients. After all, that passionate dedication was one of the things he loved most about her. What he didn't know was that in her lab, hidden away in the hospital basement, she was on the verge of a breakthrough that would change both their lives forever. Every night, as she worked on her secret research, she prayed she was making the right decision in waiting to tell him. The wedding date was getting closer, and with it, the moment when everything would have to come out into the light. Spring arrived with a flurry of wedding preparations, each day bringing them closer to their big day. The media couldn't get enough of their story. Newspapers, magazines, and online articles all wanted exclusive coverage of the billionaire's wedding. But amid the growing excitement, the bride-to-be carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through the botanical garden's glass ceiling. Hundreds of guests were already finding their seats along the specially designed accessible pathways, while reporters gathered at the designated media area, their cameras ready to capture every moment of this highly anticipated day. In her preparation room, the bride stood before a mirror, her wedding dress simple yet elegant. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the small USB drive hidden in her bouquet. It contained all her research data, years of work that could change everything. Her best friend, another physical therapist from the center, noticed her nervousness but mistook it for typical wedding jitters. "You look beautiful," her friend said, adjusting the veil. "And those kids from the rehab center can't wait to show off their wheelchair dance routine." The mention of her patients strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about her and her fiancé anymore, it was about everyone who could benefit from her research. Meanwhile, in his preparation room, the groom was surprisingly calm. He'd chosen a custom-tailored suit that complemented his wheelchair perfectly. His best man, his first employee from the early startup days, was more nervous than he was. "The media's going crazy out there," he reported, peeking through the curtains. "I've never seen so many cameras." The wedding coordinator rushed between rooms, making last-minute adjustments. Everything had been planned to perfection: the accessible seating, the lowered signing table, the specially designed dance floor. What no one knew was that the biggest moment of the day wasn't even on the schedule. As the music began to play, the garden fell silent. The wheelchair dance routine by the children from the rehabilitation center opened the ceremony, moving many guests to tears. These kids, some using wheelchairs, others with different mobility aids, performed with pure joy, showing the world that differences didn't mean limitations. The groom made his entrance next, smoothly navigating his wheelchair down the aisle. He beamed with pride, not because of his wealth or success, but because he was about to marry someone who saw him for who he was. The guests smiled, touched by the genuine happiness on his face. Then came the bride's entrance. As she walked down the aisle, she clutched her bouquet tightly, feeling the weight of the USB drive within it. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all her fears melted away. This was the man who had shown her that love knew no boundaries, who had supported her patients without hesitation, who had never let his disability define him. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. The officiant spoke about love's power to overcome any obstacle, about how true connection goes beyond physical limitations. The bride and groom had written their own vows, and the groom went first. His words were honest and touching, speaking about how she had brought light into his life, how she saw past his wheelchair to his heart. Then it was her turn. She took a deep breath, looking out at the gathered crowd, family, friends, patients, medical professionals, and media representatives. Her prepared vows sat in her pocket, but she knew it was time for the truth. "My love," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I've rehearsed these vows 100 times, but today I need to say something different." A murmur went through the crowd. Her fiancé looked at her with concern and curiosity. "For the past 5 years," she continued, pulling the USB drive from her bouquet, "I've been working on something in secret, not just as a physical therapist, but as a researcher." She saw his eyes widen with understanding. "I've developed a neural interface technology that could help people with spinal cord injuries regain mobility." The garden fell completely silent. Camera flashes stopped. Everyone held their breath. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid you think I got close to you because of your condition, afraid of raising false hopes, afraid of failing." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But this research, it's showing amazing results. And I couldn't marry you without you knowing the whole truth about who I am and what I've been working on." She stepped closer to his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. "This isn't just about us. It's about every patient I've ever worked with, every person who's been told they'll never walk again. The technology isn't perfect, and success isn't guaranteed, but it could change lives. Your life, if you want to try it, but also the lives of so many others." The silence in the garden was deafening. Hundreds of guests waited to see how the groom would react to this unprecedented wedding revelation. Medical professionals in the audience began whispering among themselves, recognizing the potential significance of her announcement. His face showed a mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, understanding, and something else. Something that would determine not just their future, but potentially the future of medical science itself. For several heartbeats, the botanical garden remained perfectly still. The groom looked at his bride, tears forming in his eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he started laughing, a warm, genuine laugh that broke the tension in the air. "Only you," he said, shaking his head with a smile, "would turn our wedding into a medical breakthrough announcement." His words made everyone chuckle, releasing the nervous energy that had built up. "But that's exactly why I fell in love with you. Your heart is always thinking about how to help others." He reached up and took her hands in his. "I don't care if I never take another step," he said softly. "I fell in love with you because you saw me as a whole person, not a problem to be fixed. But this research, it's not really about me, is it?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's about everyone who's ever been told you can't. It's about giving people choices, hope, possibilities." The groom turned to address the gathered crowd. "Well, everyone, it looks like we're not just celebrating a wedding today, we're witnessing something much bigger." He looked back at his bride. "And I know exactly what we should do about it." Right there, in front of hundreds of guests and dozens of cameras, they made a decision that would change countless lives. Together, they announced that they would establish a new foundation, combining his tech company's resources with her groundbreaking research. "The research will be open source," the bride announced, her voice growing stronger. "Available to medical teams worldwide. No patents, no profit margins, just hope for anyone who needs it." The medical professionals in the audience gasped, recognizing the enormous impact this could have. One of their young patients from the rehabilitation center, sitting in the front row in her wheelchair, raised her hand excitedly. "Does this mean more people can get better like we do in therapy?" The bride knelt down beside the child's wheelchair. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. And you know what? You and all our other amazing patients helped make this happen. Every time you tried one more step, one more exercise, you showed us what's possible." The wedding ceremony transformed into something more. A moment of hope, of possibility, of love extending far beyond two people. The officiant, wiping away tears, asked if they were ready to proceed with their vows. They looked at each other and nodded. As they exchanged rings, the meaning seemed deeper now. These weren't just symbols of their love, but of their shared commitment to making the world better. When the officiant pronounced them married, the applause was thunderous. The reception that followed was unlike any other. Instead of just celebrating their marriage, guests from different walks of life, doctors, patients, tech developers, researchers, began forming connections, sharing ideas, seeing possibilities. A year later, their story had evolved in ways no one could have predicted. The bride's research, now backed by their joint foundation, had entered official clinical trials. The first results were promising, not miracle cures, but real, measurable progress for people with spinal cord injuries. The groom did try the neural interface technology, but not right away. "I wanted to make sure others had the chance first," he explained in their first joint interview. "This was never about fixing me. It was about giving everyone the choice to write their own story." Their rehabilitation center had grown into a world-class research facility where patients received cutting-edge treatment regardless of their ability to pay. The children's ward was always filled with laughter, hope, and the latest accessible technology. On their first anniversary, they sat together in their favorite spot in the hospital's rooftop garden. He had regained some movement in his legs through the neural interface, though he still primarily used his wheelchair. But that wasn't what made him smile. "Look at that," he said, pointing to a young patient taking their first steps with the new technology. The child's parents were crying, hugging each other, while the physical therapy team cheered. His wife squeezed his hand. "That's what it's all about," she said softly. "Everyone deserves a chance to defy the odds." They had proven that love wasn't about fixing each other, it was about supporting each other's dreams, about seeing possibilities where others saw limitations. Their story had become more than a fairy tale. It was a reminder that the greatest breakthroughs often come from the heart. As the sun set on their anniversary, they looked out over the city they'd helped transform. Their love story had rippled out into the world, touching lives they'd never even meet. And they knew this wasn't the end of their story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, innovation, and the power of unconditional love.